Welcome back to The Move, where we're vibing through a book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Khoe, and in today's episode, we're talking how Bugs Bunny, the cartoon, deceived millions of America into getting this specific piece of biblical truth wrong. If you're wondering what in the world am I talking about, we're talking about Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 through 32. My guest today is, of course, the one and the only Pastor Jonathan Leonardo. Jonathan, in order for us to start, I have two confessions I got to make. First,
you're a schmuck, man.
First confession is this. I wanted to apologize because I've given you like all the meaty, challenging, somewhat problematic or maybe difficult text. I don't know. Maybe if you feel that way, if that's accurate or not. Like we've done several genealogies and kind of some challenging texts, and today's one of those. It's a doozy, and it's funny because I see you got a book on the couch right next to you because we're gonna dive into some meat. I'm just curious to see what you bring to the table.
Why is it that? How do you know that I have a book on the couch right next to me?
Well, that's because you and I are actually, for the first time in quite some time, in the same room.
We're actually in the same room.
This is super exciting.
We would turn these cameras around, but we can't because of the setup.
That's just the way it is.
Is just over the top of me, so
right
I can look directly at him today.
Yeah, feels good.
Yeah, the last episode we were together, you were in Oregon.
Yeah, very likely.
And now you're here in Hawaii.
Yeah. Which leads me to confession number 2. Yeah. And confession number 2 is, dude, I just miss you. I'm glad to be here. Like, honestly, that's how I was going to break the fact that we were in the same room.
Oh, okay.
And you stole my thunder. But yeah, it's good to be here. I mean, it's Hawaii, so it's always good to be in Hawaii.
Yeah, it is good.
But I'm sitting in your abode,
my house,
and it's fantastic. I love it.
Good times. It's good times.
Absolutely. Okay, so people are probably wondering how in the world is Bugs Bunny related to the Bible, and it's just one.
I wondered the same.
One simple tidbit. I was reading through the chapter today, and I came across a name that I saw in the book, and it's Nimrod.
Yeah.
And the only time I've ever heard the word Nimrod used, it's always been like a pejorative, like, you Nimrod. It's like a slur or a way to make fun of someone. And as I was reading it in preparation for this conversation, I decided to Google, like, where in the world did the idea of Nimrod being a mean thing that you call someone, where did it originate from? And it turns out that the reason why Nimrod is a slur is because of the cartoon Bugs Bunny.
Okay.
Bugs Bunny would call Elmer Fudd a Nimrod.
Yeah.
And it was said sarcastically because Nimrod in the Bible, as we'll see in the text, is a great hunter.
Yeah, because Elmer Fudd was always hunting for rabbit.
And Elmer Fudd could not for the life of him capture anything. So it's like, all right, way to go, Nimrod.
You just made that connection for me because I remember now that the word Nimrod is used over and over by Bugs Bunny, but because Elmer Fudd was a terrible hunter.
That's exactly it.
So that's the joke.
And so this is how Bugs Bunny has deceived millions of people on this key biblical truth.
Man, you just made a connection to my childhood and theology.
Who knew? I mean, the scripture influences American culture in so many different ways.
Oh, absolutely.
I wouldn't have guessed that this was one of them, but there you go, America. Here's a gift.
One of the other ways is how many of us actually have Hebrew names and don't know it.
That's absolutely right. We discussed on season 2 how you and I are actually,
we have the same name.
Yeah, we do. And so does Mateo.
Yeah, at least our names mean the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Gift of God, right? Or God's gift.
Same thing with Mateo.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this passage to me is really, really interesting. And it's interesting because it's like a hinge passage, right? And just like literally a hinge where a door is on a hinge and it turns. The whole of Scripture turns right around this part. It's something that I think is unappreciated by many, and it was unappreciated by me for a long time until somebody pointed it out. I think it might have been Tim Mackey pointing it out on the Bible Project.
From the Bible Project. Yeah. Okay.
I think I was listening to him and he pointed out. I was like, man, that's true. And I think I didn't do the addition, the numbers, but that the amount of time, historical time, years that's covered from Genesis 12 to Revelation is comparable or even less than the amount of time that's covered from Genesis 1 to 10.
So there's more history in the first 12 chapters,
11
chapters of the Bible than the rest of the Bible.
Or as many, right? Because if you take that Abraham, I don't know the dating, but if you go all from Abraham 400 years, the Exodus, if you put the Exodus, dates or whatever, 1400
I see
BC
the charts being drawn.
Yeah, if I remember something like 1400, 1200, something like that. I mean, and then you add to the church and to John and Patmos, you don't have more than 1,500, 1,800 years, right? Where in Genesis 1 through 9, when you have Methuselah and Adam living to 900 years, 1,000 years, right? And then you have this, descending bell curve, maybe, right? This gradual degradation. You have longer time there in those first 9 chapters than you do in the rest of the scripture. So that when you get to Genesis 10 actually encompasses the whole world. Right. It encompasses the whole world, and this large swath of history kind of culminates with Genesis 10. And Genesis 10 has a lot of symbolism. Genesis 10 is the genealogies of Noah and his 3 sons. However, there is a series of nations that are actually cataloged in Genesis 10, and that numerical number is actually 70. Right. So the idea is that this is the whole sum total of the world, right? And also what's highlighted is that all of the nations emerge from these 3 sons, from Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? Which
would make sense if Noah, it's only him and his family on the boat, and everyone, if the narrative is true, everyone else is deceased at this point.
That's right.
They all come from kind of this same pot. So
and this is the context of the following passage, which you'll get into, I'm sure, with somebody else, but Babylon and Babel, the Tower of Babel, that it's a hinge precisely because everything that has happened thus far gives way to the completion of nations emerging. We started with family. That family might have turned into some clans. It turned into these genealogies between brothers. Those brothers turned into this at least expansive people group that cover now the globe. That gets destroyed in the flood, and then it emerges again. So humanity has had a start in Genesis 1. It has had a restart through Noah. Now it finds a completion in this genealogy, the 70 nations, cataloged by Noah's 3 sons, and it's going to climax. I don't want to take the thunder, but it's going to climax in the very next passage where this nation, these people, cataloged this way, encompass the new restarted humanity, and yet these 70 nations, the whole of them, are going to reinscribe and redo and might even move farther and further down the path of being disconnected from God than the very people that existed when the deluge came, right? So that Genesis 10 just presents the story of the world, the history of the world, the climax of the nations all together, right on the precipice of something grand occurring, right? And that grand thing that's going to occur is going to follow in the next couple of chapters. I
mean, this makes sense. I'm seeing the common thread. I mean, in our previous episode with Pastor Harold, he was talking about how one of the major themes that we shouldn't miss in that genealogy is the fact that things are getting worse and worse. That crime is not only on the increase, but there's a certain pride that is now coming with crime and with evil and wickedness. Whereas maybe earlier on with Cain and Abel, there was like, oh no, something happened, but I still want to hide the fact that I that I killed. Am I my brother's keeper? Was kind of the attitude of that time. And now it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse.
And something that you see at play already in its seed form is the futility of the flesh. Because you have Noah's lineage, who are his fleshly lineage. They follow his genealogy. They are his biological children. And Noah is a man, a preacher of righteousness that we understand. But do his 3 children follow in his steps?
Doesn't seem like it.
It doesn't seem like it, because if we know the story, what ends up happening is that somebody else is selected from outside, right, of this genealogical trajectory that Noah presents. Now, certainly there's some sort of connection, but what ends up happening, and I don't want to steal anybody's thunder from Genesis 12, right? Somebody's called not according to the flesh. Abraham's not called according to the flesh. What we have in Genesis are these genealogies that are thus far connected to the flesh. They find their apex in these 70 nations, and ultimately is showing the futility of the flesh, because even if you're connected biologically to the man of righteousness, Noah, that does not mean that you inherit that which he had if you don't follow in his footsteps. And we see that actually in another genealogy back in Genesis 4 and 5, when in Genesis 4, there's the flesh genealogy of Cain, and everybody in his line dies. I talked about this last time we were here. But when you get to Genesis 5 and you follow Seth's genealogy, the difference between those men dying and a man actually living is not of the flesh. It is because he walked with the Lord, Enoch. And already you have this distinction that John is going to explicitly draw out. And that is that to those who received him, he gave them the right to be called the children of God, to be the children of God, not born after the flesh, but born after the spirit. And already here in Genesis 10, we see the futility of the flesh coming to this perfection of nations, and yet on the precipice of yet another disaster that we're going to find.
So this chapter, maybe there's more that we can mine and glean as far as the names and whatever else is happening. But the major thing that we're wanting to focus on is that there's this hinge that's taking place. Things are progressively getting worse and worse and worse over the last couple of chapters. And something big is about to happen.
And it's really worth noting that this is a culmination of hundreds, if not thousands years of history at this point, right? You have, if you hold, you follow Father Usher's chronology, and he has the history of the world at 6,000 years. This is just I'm using this as a teaching tool.
Well, I've heard this before, where people will count the number of years in a genealogy and come to the conclusion that the earth is 6,000 or 7,000 years, somewhere in that range.
Yeah. There's a famous guy called Usher. I forget. He was a churchman.
Pop star. Oh, sorry.
Not the pop star, right? He was a churchman, and he dated the world via the genealogies. This is where you get the 6,000 years, right? And now remember, I'm just remembering now that if you take the 6,000 years and you catalog Israel's history and all the way up to the church, you may get 3,000 years. So there's 3,000 years plus that's packed into Genesis 1 through 10. This is what I'm drawing attention to, and that Genesis 1 through 10 is this very terse, tight, quick bullet. Like, this is what humanity's like. This is what humanity's like. This is the problem. This is the problem. This is the problem. This is the problem. Watch. Look at that. Genesis 10. Look, now it's perfected. It's all over the world. They've 70 nations, and yet they're reinscribing the same problem. We need something different.
Oh, shoot.
Like, this is what Genesis 1 through 10 is. So it's just the speed. Right?
So what I'm gleaning from what you just said is that I shouldn't necessarily feel guilty if I glaze over this chapter and I read it very quickly.
No. This chapter is actually chock full of little tidbits when you start making the connections with names and the genealogies, because you start seeing how every single component in the genealogies, how the nations that are named, they come from 3 sons. That means there's relations there. So that then in the future, when this new nation emerges, that's not a part of these 70 nations, they are as well related, but in a different way. It's so that then the problem between Israel and the nations is the same problem between Cain and Abel, between Cain and Seth,
I'm jumping ahead in my mind. That sounded an awful lot like Joseph's story, which we'll get to at some point.
Yeah. This is why Joseph, exactly, 100%. It's because it's just retelling the same story with different actors, different players, but it's the same. Yeah, so then you have this genealogy of these nations, these brothers, these 11, these 12 versus this one. Awesome. It's the same problem that Israel finds itself when it's going through the wilderness and it's trying to hook up with Ammon or Moab or Edom, and they have beef with them because they're related, they're family.
Sheesh. Yeah. And if you thought your family Thanksgiving or Christmas party was tense, I mean, we got no clue.
Yeah. So yes, again, Genesis 10, hinge passage, culmination of the earth history up till now, and it's just on the precipice of doing something big yet again, because humanity has been restarted twice and has been started twice, and now it's moving into this next phase. And this next phase has a cataclysmic event that occurs, and then we're introduced to the history of Israel.
Wow.
But I won't get there.
Something big is about to happen, and if you'd like to know what that thing is, well, you'll just have to tune in tomorrow. It's like the perfect cliffhanger. I love it. Awesome. Who knows
what's that big thing?
Who knows? Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate the insights, and I'm excited to continue this journey.
Let's do it.